This week on The Record, Missouri votes. High-stakes races for Republican and Democratic candidates in Tuesday's primary. Who's on the ballot? And we meet both Republicans running to replace Congressman Blaine Luetkemeyer. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. Thanks for joining us at a bit of a different time this week during this busy Olympics schedule. It's also our last program before the Missouri primary. Voters will decide who will advance to November at the ballot box this Tuesday. There are so many more candidates and races we wish we could have highlighted, but with 2 days to go, we turn our attention this week to the one vacant seat in Congress, Missouri's 3rd Congressional District, which Blaine Luetkemeyer has represented for more than a decade. Former State Senator Republican Bob Onder joins us now in his campaign bid to become the congressman in the 3rd Congressional District, parts of Jefferson County, a lot of St. Charles County,
right.
So a lot of our viewing area here. Should you become the next member of Congress from Missouri, what would you be bringing that your opponent would not?
Well, certainly I will be prioritizing restoring sanity to the border situation, reinstituting President Donald Trump's immigration policies that kept our country secure and our border secure. Certainly,
would those be changes from either the incumbent or from your opponent?
Well, not from my incumbent, but certainly those will be changes that President Trump and I and fellow Republicans will institute over the current Biden-Harris policies.
On the border, should Republicans have taken the win in the border bill that President Biden and Republican Senator James Lankford had supported, which would have sent a lot more resources to Border Patrol agents?
That was not a win. That would have codified 5,000 illegal aliens a day. That before the president then would still have discretion as to whether to close the border. So no, that bill was not a win.
That's not quite right. You're talking about the shutoff valve to the entire border that would have been activated if that surge showed up. But there were other parts that would speed up.
Which President Biden could then override, which he undoubtedly would because he's opened a red carpet to illegal immigration in his 3 years in office.
Mm-hmm. So you want to see federal change. So if you got a bill on your desk that would improve either resources to the southern border, you would vote for it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But we don't necessarily need new laws at all. We need to enforce the laws that were on the books as we did under Donald Trump. We need to make ICE not a babysitter's rolling out the red carpet to illegal immigration, but rather enforce immigration law, cooperate with local law enforcement. I've talked to sheriffs and law enforcement across the 3rd Congressional District who say that when they detain illegal aliens, even illegal aliens who have committed crimes, ICE has no interest in coming and getting them and deporting them. That's got to change.
Well, certainly there has been a surge to the point where many of those law enforcement are outnumbered. I want to ask if you can clarify this. You're running for federal office, but
Yes.
you had a lot of experience in state office.
Yes.
As you know, in a Republican federalist government,
Yes.
each state doesn't check on who comes in and across those borders. There's free flow of travel. Your
right.
old pal, Senator Bill Eigel, running for governor, says he would, as Missouri governor, deport people. Can you clarify for him that there is no Missouri state law that gives him power to do that?
I think the federal government ought to allow states to act in a complementary way to enforce federal immigration law. In fact, when I was in the Missouri House in 2008, I passed and Governor Matt Blunt signed the strongest law in the country to fight illegal immigration. And among other things, it ended catch and release. It banned sanctuary cities. It cracked down on illegals who were committing crimes and contractors who were hiring illegals. But all of that requires cooperation by the federal government. Mm-hmm. If the federal government does not cooperate, we can have bans on sanctuary cities, but if there's no enforcement by ICE of our immigration law, it's all for naught.
Is it hypocritical for Missouri Republicans to say we want more cooperation from the federal government on immigration, but we're going to sue to block the federal government and pass laws to block the federal government from enforcing gun laws here?
I don't think so, because the right to keep and bear arms is in the Second Amendment.
And the federal government doesn't impede on
the
that.
Second Amendment Preservation Act was to say that should the federal government use, say, executive orders to infringe upon Second Amendment rights, that Missouri law enforcement would not cooperate in that infringement.
So when the Supreme Court voted 8-1 that red flag laws were not infringing on Second Amendment rights, you think
I think they got it wrong.
8-1, you think the Supreme Court was wrong?
Yeah, they got it wrong. And if I recall, that was on a technicalities, something about standing, not about the idea that an individual's Second Amendment rights can be infringed without adequate due process.
Certainly there are adjudications for people that have restraining orders and for people that go through those. If you're going to say that a person shouldn't have, that red flag laws infringe their Second Amendment rights, then should you also have to explain why someone who has threatened to kill someone, someone who has hit a partner of theirs, or someone who is posing a danger to someone, why should that person be armed with lethal force in their moment of their life's worst crisis?
No, the question is whether, of course they should be. The question is, what is the standard of proof? And I think the standard of proof should be actual due process and conviction of that, not a mere accusation.
You were instrumental in the abortion regulation and restriction debate in Missouri. Would you vote for a nationwide abortion ban?
Yeah, in our federal system, the so-called police powers are vested in the states, so that we really, pro-lifers for 50 years have fought to return those rights to the states. But look, I'll always be pro-life. I think there are a lot of issues, federal issues pertaining to the right to life, including whether taxpayers should be forced to fund abortion, whether taxpayers should fund abortion abroad. In other words, the Mexico City Agreement needs to be restored, which I think it will under President Trump.
Are you talking about members of the military?
Well, I'm talking about Medicaid. I'm talking about abroad, as in
members of the military have federal
international
health
programs.
Yeah.
But no, we should not be. The U.S. taxpayers should not be forced to pay for any abortions,
including members of the military.
Any abortions.
So I want to make sure I'm clear on that. You're saying states have police powers, but should the federal government take any action to further restrict access to abortion nationwide?
I think there will be issues that will come up pertaining to life, as they did, for instance, in the partial abortion ban, which was a bipartisan issue. And I think we've just got to take those one issue at a time.
A lot of voters ask a simple question. What are you going to do for me? I'm going to ask the question this way. You're familiar with earmarks. These are projects that members of Congress can advocate for in a lot of different ways and can bring home the bacon. Mm-hmm. Some members of Congress have said, I'm not going to do that. And a lot of local governments, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of other people have urged them, please reconsider, we need investment. Parts of rural America are sadly forgotten and need upgrades, need infrastructure. Where are you? Will you accept, will you advocate for earmarks in Missouri?
Look, there are too many earmarks that have been utter wastes. Including a lot in the recently passed omnibus bill.
Well, you wouldn't advocate for waste, would you?
But I will advocate for. No, I will not, and I will advocate for instance, Missouri's appropriate share of federal highway funds, of funds for important projects at our universities. So it just depends on the issue.
On earmarks, you are a yes or you're a no?
So I just have to look at the particular need of the district, and
sounds like you're open to it.
I'm open to advocating for the district in any way I need to as congressman.
Before we let you go, do you have any other distinctions that you say, look, voters need to know I'm different from my opponent because of X, Y, or Z?
Sure. I'm the only candidate endorsed in my race by President Trump, by Missouri Right to Life, by National Right to Life, by other conservative leaders like Ted Cruz and Byron Donalds. I am the conservative in my race.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're back in a moment. Welcome back. Let's pick up our coverage of Missouri's 3rd Congressional District in a conversation with former State Senator Kurt Schaefer. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Can you make a case that you're the more conservative candidate in this race?
Yeah, and I think if you look at my record compared to my main opponent, Bob Onder, my record is substantially more conservative than Bob's. And the other thing
on which issues? On
pro-life issues, on pro-gun issues. No one can beat me on those issues.
Why is Right to Life backing him?
I think they've gotten into a lot of positions supporting things that kind of get outside of their zone. I know that I closed down the abortion clinic that was in Columbia from performing abortions. I led that investigation. I chaired the Sanctity of Life Committee to do that. Those are the things that, frankly, no one else did in the Senate when I was there or has done that since.
Does the Trump endorsement make a difference in this race?
I've never met the president, but I think that when the president meets me, he's going to understand that I have the skills and the ability to help him get his agenda done much better than anyone else in this race.
Term limits took you out of the Senate in 2016. Mm-hmm. What brings you back to politics in this capacity now?
Because I think it's hard. Look, I have kids, and what I realize is my kids are young adults. They're starting lives. The position this country is in right now is so substantially different from the time that I was that age. The lack of opportunities, 400% increase in home prices, 50% increase in grocery prices. People can't afford to start a life, to start a business, to start a family. That's got to stop, and that stops with Congress.
You're running to be one of 435 members of
I
that
get
body.
it.
What can one person do there about any of those things?
I will tell you, when I was one of 34 in the Missouri Senate, I probably got more done than anybody else there. I was chair of appropriations. I cut over $1 billion out of the state budget during that time. Things that people told me I could never do. When I investigated the Department of Economic Development for sharing concealed carry information with the federal government to find out who owns guns, I led that investigation and I stopped it. I subpoenaed witnesses. I put them under oath. Those are the kind of things that I bring to the table that nobody else in this race brings.
You mentioned the abortion issue. Would you support a federal abortion ban?
Yes.
Why?
Because I am pro-life and I believe that life should be protected.
Donald Trump's on the campaign trail right now saying some Republicans go too far with this and that the proper place for this decision to be settled is in the states with voters.
I think where we are right now in this particular time in history, I think the president is right that states do have the ability to do that. But if there is a federal law on that issue, I will vote for it.
A lot of conversation comes up. Federal office holders in Missouri have differing opinions on whether or not you should bring back earmarks. If you should go and fight and scrap for everything you can in the budget and bring home the bacon. Where are you at on the idea of earmarks, yes or no?
Well, first of all, I'm the former chairman of appropriations for the Senate in the state of Missouri. Again, I had to make that budget balance every year and did for the 8 years that I was there and cut $1 billion of wasteful spending out of the state budget. I know how to do a state budget in a way that Congress currently does not have the ability to do that. But I'll tell you this.
Congress can do something states can't. They can print money.
Well, they can, and that is the difference, because in Missouri we deliver balanced budgets as I did. But here's the difference. What you have to determine is how much money you have to spend or that you're going to spend, and you operate within that. You don't do what Congress does now, which is simply borrow more, but within that limit. Those decisions should be made directly by people elected to be in Congress to determine where their tax dollars go. Because if those elected officials don't do it in a transparent way, somebody in some agency is going to make that decision.
I appreciate the point you're making, but it doesn't answer the question. So say the House Speaker, a minority leader, or some budget chair comes to you and they're trying to negotiate with you, and they say, what are things back in your district? Are there things in the 3rd Congressional District you look at now and say, hey, if I can get federal funding for this, I'm going to fight for it? What are some examples of that?
Well, absolutely. Yes, because that's the job, is to make sure you're taking care of your district.
Senator Hawley and Senator Smith, they forego earmarks. They say this is how lobbyists get their claws into you.
The issue there is, well, first of all, that's a question of whether or not somebody has the right moral compass and knows what's right and what's wrong in making their own decisions. But aside from that, someone is going to make that decision on where that money goes. And it should be done transparently by somebody elected to make those decisions. Because again, if you don't do that in a transparent way by who's elected to do that, someone in some anonymous agency, who also has a bias, by the way, on where they want that money to go, is going to make that decision. I would be proud for the 3rd Congressional District if it's for law enforcement, if it's for firefighters, if it's for public safety, roads. Absolutely, you fight for that.
I see. Where are you at on funding for further military engagement in Ukraine?
I think on Ukraine we have to be very, very careful. I think there is some national interest there, but I think simply funneling money to Ukraine is not the answer to that situation.
What assurances would you need to see before you could open up the pocketbooks of American taxpayers to continue funding military operations there?
I think there has to be a longer-term plan, and it has to be in the United States' strategic interest.
What does victory look like?
I think that it's number one, stopping the conflict, and whether or not that results in a change in boundaries, I don't know that yet, but I think that we have to figure that out, and we can't keep funneling money into Ukraine. We just can't keep doing that.
Do you think that there is anything that you can do in Congress to actually bring down prices for people here? Because isn't that really a Federal Reserve thing? What is Congress?
Well, the issue is we're at $35 trillion in national debt, and in a territory we've never been before. Even during World War II, we were at 112% GDP
Donald Trump
to national
contributed
debt.
greatly to that.
Whoever caused it, it has to be fixed. And we're not going to get home prices and groceries and everything else under control until we get that under control. Now, there are some good plans in Congress, and Blaine Luetkemeyer, our current congressman, I think, has done a great job in Congress for 16 years. He's endorsed me. I've talked to him. There are plans in Congress to rein this in, but the problem is you got a handful of people in Congress who all they want to do is vote no on everything, run out in front of the Capitol, take a selfie, get on the Sunday morning shows, talk about how important they are, and that's the difference between me and my opponent. I want to get things fixed. I don't want to go there just to be a name.
You're saying the old workhorse versus show pony line.
I would say that's exactly right.
Okay, there you go.
I think that's a good summary.
Okay, so you buried the lead. You didn't tell me that the incumbent is endorsing you.
Yeah, Blaine Luetkemeyer been there for 16 years. I think people in the 3rd Congressional District, which I live in the 3rd Congressional District. My opponent, Bob Onder, doesn't even live in the 3rd Congressional District. He can't even vote for himself. So he'll have to vote in the 2nd Congressional District because he moved out of the 3rd. I just don't think that's right to ask people to vote for you when you're not part of the group that you are supposed to be a representative for, and you can't even vote for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Members of Congress would have to, I think they have to move in.
They do not have to move
They can stay where they're at, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you got a guy
who's near enough to it, no?
Near enough doesn't count. You don't get to vote. You got a guy spending millions of his own dollars to buy a congressional seat where he doesn't live.
All right. Well, we got to leave it there, but I do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, former State Senator Kurt Schaefer.
Thanks for having me on.
Voters will make their choices very soon. We're back in just a minute. If by some chance you're still an undecided voter, well, time is running out. You got to pick. Polls close in the Missouri primary this Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and a lot of big races are on the ballot. In St. Louis, a hotly contested race for Congress. Prosecutor Wesley Bell challenging Representative Cori Bush. They both got their starts protesting injustice in Ferguson before going on to topple longtime incumbents in their respective positions. Now, it's a face-off among former friends. Last year, Bell told Bush he would not challenge her in a phone call where she offered to endorse him for an even higher office. Then the world changed. Bell pivoted to challenge Bush after Hamas attacked Israel, and she called for Israel to stand down. Pro-Israel groups have now spent more than $7 million either highlighting Bush's votes against President Biden's infrastructure bill or boosting Bell's bid. Now, some building trade unions, black pastors, and Jewish rabbis are forming a coalition with Bell to try and defeat Bush. She's leaning on her passionate progressive base to try and withstand the toughest challenge of her political career. Republican voters will pick from a long list of primary candidates in the race to become the next Secretary of State. House Speaker Dean Plocker's lead in campaign cash hasn't quite translated to support in the polls we've seen. State Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman has also struggled to break away from the pack. Republican Jamie Corley is pitching voters on a professional approach to the job, one she says will stay above the fray of partisan brawling and entertainment-driven shock and awe politics. You've also got Freedom Caucus member Denny Hoskins, right-wing social media influencer Valentina Gomez, former clerk Shane Scholler, and House Republican Adam Schwadron to round out the crowded field. In the Senate race, Lucas Kunce is back for a second primary bid to run for the U.S. Senate. He laid that groundwork in 2022 in a failed bid against Trudy Busch Valentine. Kunce's prolific fundraising haul has left Senator Carla May trailing far behind, but she hopes a strong turnout from familiar voters in the city can help her pull off an upset. The winner will face Senator Josh Hawley in an uphill battle come November. Governor Mike Parson's record comes into play in at least two races. One, the GOP primary for Attorney General, where his government lawyer and hand-picked Attorney General Andrew Bailey is running to try and win the first election of his career. Donald Trump's criminal lawyer, Will Scharf, is challenging him for the job. The former president effectively sidestepped the showdown and gave a vague endorsement to them both. And while Governor Parson isn't on the ballot himself, his Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe is. Challengers Jay Ashcroft and Bill Eigel are running insurgent races against Parson's legacy, appealing to GOP voters frustrated with the status quo. Democratic voters will see a familiar name in Crystal Quaid on their ballot alongside a candidate with deeper pockets. Businessman Mike Hamra is hoping his ads and centrist pro-business tone might propel him to the governor's mansion in November. And here in the city of St. Louis, Sheriff Vernon Betts is working to ward off a primary challenge from former Deputy Alfred Montgomery, who was fired from that department in 2019 after just a few months on the job. We'll be back in just a moment. Here's your reminder, mark your calendar. This Tuesday is a big day. It's the day we get to pick who speaks for us, who debates for us, who votes for us in the halls of power, who advocates us for things we need most, and who represents the best of us. Well, at least that's the hope. But it does take all of us to do that. Let's check the record. It turns out in the last major primary election, August 2022, just 24% of voters showed up in St. Louis City and County. 76% of us stayed home. Missouri did see a bump in November, that big election with 45% turnout, but the only people on the ballot there were the ones who the 24% picked to begin with. When I ask people why they don't vote, I got to tell you, I hear a lot of valid reasons. They'll say, the candidates don't speak for me, or they don't speak to me. I don't see what they'll do for me. And look, I hear that. We do deserve better candidates, candidates who actually represent us. But I can guarantee one way they never will, if you stay home. The only way to lose every fight is to surrender it before the bell rings. Besides, if you throw away your vote willingly, why would they ever work to try and earn it? You have a chance to send politicians a message this Tuesday. I hope you'll take it. And if you're one of those voters out there wondering, well, who do I vote for? What do they stand for? We've assembled a voter guide up on our website, kstk.com/guide. You can go there now and learn a lot more about who's on your ballot and make a more informed decision. That's all of our time this week. We'll recap all those election results right here next week. Until then, we're off the record.